Right, well, hello everybody. Thank you for joining us to talk about the Spiral project. We're privileged to have Pete Calabrese, who is, Pete, let me get it right, you're the current CEO of CanAm, is that CanAm Enterprises?
CanAm Investor Services, yeah. So we are the broker-dealer arm that runs sales for CanAm.
Great, so as we move through this session, right, it really needs to be interactive, otherwise it's pointless. So if you have a question, please do raise it. But, a couple of issues. Firstly, a lot of people are about to go through a consular interview, Peter. So, an update so that it arms people to answer questions at the consular interview level would be greatly appreciated. And then secondly, I think there's actually three issues. Secondly would be the sort of likely time frame on sort of return of capital and what that looks like. And then thirdly, anyone who may have to face it, sort of redeployment, what does it mean, what's going to happen, and sort of what are the options? Is that fair?
Absolutely. Sounds
great.
Good.
So let's start with, let's suppose I'm going to, lots of people going to consular interviews in June and July. What do I need to know about the Spiral project for the purposes of a consular interview? So perhaps we can start just with, if you could give us an overview of the project, where it's at, and sort of what's going on.
Absolutely. So thanks for having me, Mark. It's nice to talk to all of you. Some of you have gotten to speak to recently, but for the rest of you, it's always great to reconnect. Love hearing from you. So the project at its base, you guys all know, it's, it was we structured a loan that we provide to Tishman Speyer to develop the Spiral. It's got 2.8 million rentable square feet. It's a Class A office building. It's being built in the Hudson Yards neighborhood of New York City. It's on, if they ask you, it's on 66 Hudson Boulevard in New York. The project is making great construction progress. It is on pace. It began its construction mid-2018 and is on pace to receive its temporary certificate of occupancy by the end of August.
So let's just take a step back. Right, what is exactly a CO and why is it needed for a project?
Well, so this is basically, your certificate of occupancy is essentially it indicates that property is safe for occupancy. It's a license that is necessary in order for people to begin to move in and start taking use of the space in the building. It's one of the important milestones in the completion of the construction of the building.
And so people know, just generally, not talking about Spiral specifically, but it's very, very common in a commercial lease for the rental obligations to begin the day the CO, certificate of occupancy, is issued. So again, that may or may not apply to all of the leases in the Pfizer building. I don't know, haven't seen them all. But that would be very common, that the obligation of the tenant would begin the day that the CO is issued. So it's as Pete just said, it's a very important step in the project and a very positive one.
Yes. So that is coming in, that's expected to come in August of this year. So very shortly, a few months. The leasing for the building has remained very strong. As many of you knew when we were beginning the discussion on this, Pfizer is taking space as the anchor tenant in the building. They're taking 14 floors, about 750,000 square feet. They are expected to be taking they are going to be taking and moving into the building after that TCO. That is happening in the fourth quarter of this year, as well as Debevois and Plimpton. They are a New York-based law firm that's also taking 13 floors of the building. Very large law firm, which is also one of the anchor tenants that was initially discussed coming into this. One of the other fairly early leaseholders that will be taking their space soon is Alliance Bernstein. They are a wealth manager. They are taking 3 floors and 200,000 square feet. some of the newer leases that have been signed, Turner Construction, that is the actual construction firm that is building the Spiral. They are moving their global headquarters to the Spiral building. They're taking 2 floors. HSBC, firm, their U.S. headquarters to the Spiral. That lease was fairly recently signed within the last few months, but they're taking 265,000 square feet. And New York Presbyterian Hospital is going to be taking 66,000 square feet, including some of the base floors. So they're going to be having a spinal operating center. That's going to be not the base floor, because the base floor is going to be used for retail, but the second floor with an entrance from the base. Sorry, Mark.
So the tenant quality sounds good, but when this project was initially devised, what percentage of the building was sort of targeted to be leased at this point, and where are we at?
They're very much on target to where they hope to be. I mean, obviously, you know, COVID has caused some disruptions in terms of some of the discussions that have happened, but you know, instead of a more linear acquisition of leaseholders, there was a gap, which is why I talk about those initial 3 leaseholders, Pfizer, Debevois, and Alliance Bernstein, because they were very early in terms of securing those leases, and then there was a little bit of a time frame in between them, but conversations have remained active with all of the borrowers, and they have been able to now been securing more and more leases with more discussions going on. I mean, at this point, the building is about 70% leased, which is definitely on track with where they had hoped to be at this point.
Okay, so it's about 70% leased. Are you able to comment at all vis-a-vis sort of the value of the rental contract sort of come in versus sort of target?
So their target was always, you know, $100 to $225 a square foot, and their leasing has been coming in very much within that range. Obviously, it's a fairly wide range, but they've been very comfortable with the rates they've been able to get. You know, and again, part of their strategy was to have some base tenant holders coming in at the very beginning. So someone like Pfizer is going to be coming in on the lower end of that, but that's, you know, that's fairly standard in terms of bringing on like your anchor tenant, that would be that they would be, you know, coming in and taking a lower cost per square foot to take on that larger amount of space. But as they're able to now take on smaller type spaces for people, they are able to more strategically pick out who they're going to be taking on and charging some higher rental rates.
Gotcha. So Pete, sort of putting that all together, do you see sort of any possibility that, I guess, you know, remind us of the repayment date on this loan? And do you see sort of any possibility that there may be like a delay at all in return of that capital, or do you see it as very much on track, and why?
No, I mean, so the borrower, the loan matures in September of 2023, so next year. The date I don't want to get, I believe it's September 25th, but it's late September of 2023 is when the loan matures. The borrower does have the option for 2 individual 1-year extensions. So they would be there. It's not something that they would be doing all in one shot. So they would potentially do 1 year, and then they could potentially do another year after that.
Have you had any? So first of all, for people who are about to do a consular interview, and I know we all know this, but just remind us, who is the borrower? Because they could well be asked that.
The borrower is Tishman Speyer. And what I'm going to do for all of you who are, you know, in that spot where you're potentially going to see your consular interview, I'm going to put in, sorry, talking and typing at the same time is not my strong suit. So there's the email address of our investor relations department. Please reach out to them if you have a consular interview that's coming, because we have an entire packet of information that we can share with you with a lot of these basic type things. Because as I'm talking, and there are things I'm giving in terms of updates, a lot of the basic type stuff they have prepared, and they can send that over to you. So please reach out to them If you don't see that, you can reach out to me and I can give you that email address as well. But yeah, they have an entire packet of information that will give you a lot of this basic type information just to have it in front of you, something that you can print out, something that you can talk about, because we want to make this as anxiety free as possible. But yeah,
So,
Tishman Speyer is the borrower. Tishman is a known and renowned real estate firm, right? So they have developments. They're New York based, but they have developments both across the United States and across the world. So for them, their creditworthiness is really it's extraordinarily high. So in terms of their ability to meet their financing debts, we have no doubt of their ability to do so. I mean, to that point,
again,
this is the. Sorry, Mark. What?
that's all right. Go ahead. Sorry, I'm sorry I interrupted.
No, sorry. So this is the third deal that we've done with Tishman Speyer, and they had two previous deals also in the New York area. One that was $153 million, and one that was $75 million that they repaid in full on time. I mean, it was actually a few months early. They were able to repay that. Those deals also did have the option for extension years, but because of the financing that they were seeing at the time, they refinanced that loan and they repaid our debt in full and on time. So I don't know. I can't say whether or not that means that they wouldn't potentially use the extension years for this project, for the Spiral. I mean, they do have those at their as an option to them. And if the financing that they're seeing dictates that they would want to use those option years, that is something that they would be able to move forward with.
But the question was, have you had specific conversations with Tishman about whether they want to exercise those extensions or not?
No, it's a little early for that. I mean, we're still a year away from them being able to.
And just remind everybody, what is what's the initial term on the initial loan?
The initial term is 5 years.
So the repayment date on the initial term is
September of 2023.
Sorry, September of 2020. Gotcha. So a couple of people joining late, sort of just a couple of things I wrote down from what you said. What you said is the project is currently at about a 70% lease up rate. And you said that that's not a material deviance. This is not your language, but fairly interpreted. That's not a material deviance from budget. I think that's what you said. Is that fair?
They're right on track in terms of budget and construction timeline. I think what we were talking was there any?
No, I mean budget in terms of when you do a building like this and you start leasing out, as the timeline goes by, you have a target in terms of the percentage lease out rate, right? So I think what you said, they're at 70%.
Yes,
so
they're correct.
The target.
They are.
And there's no material deviance. Is that fair?
Correct. Yes.
And then in terms of the lease up rate, in other words, the rental per square foot for the overall building, understanding that Pfizer's lower is what you said. Again, there's no material deviance between sort of the target per square foot rate and what you're seeing right now.
Correct.
Okay, fine. All right, we have you on video saying this, Peter. So careful.
I'm nothing to hide, so we're all good.
I'm smiling as we said it. That's a good thing.
I could talk about Spiral all day. Spiral is one that we're very comfortable hanging our hat on.
So if you were an investor, what would be your biggest concern with Spiral right now?
Well, what you're looking at right now, and I think that was a big question in terms of the purpose of this webinar is where you are in your immigration process right now, because I have zero concern or question about them repaying the loan, whether it's at the end of the original loan term in September of 2023 or after 1 or 2 potential option years. That is not the concern for me. Where, and I wouldn't call it a concern, where there is something that needs to be seen and considered for you is where you are in your immigration, and more specifically, whether or not you have completed your sustainment period. So these are at-risk investments. And in order to meet the at-risk provision of your investment, you need to have completed your sustainment period, which means that you had to have completed your conditional permanent residency period. That's the 2-year green card, the initial green card that you would have received. Many of you, for a number of factors that are, part of the industry, it's possible that you may not have completed that period by September of 2023. So what does this mean? So for some of you, it could, as counterintuitive as it might seem, be almost a positive if Tishman decided to use one of those option years. Because if, say, you have just started your conditional permanent residency within the last year or so, and you would be completing your conditional permanent residency period in, say, early 2024 or middle of 2024. Well, in that case, if Tishman decided to use that 1-year extension period that is their option, that could now capture your conditional permanent residency period, meaning that you would met your at-risk provision and you'd be able to be repaid your funds at the end of that point. That would be, and potentially for some of you that are starting your conditional permanent residency period soon, it might behoove you to have them use both of those options, because it would now allow you to meet your sustainment period. We can't control whether or not they will use those options. That is up to them. So that we'll have to wait and see on, and we'll have to see where you all are in terms of your immigration status. But what we will be able to do is,
investor has not filed his or her I-829 by September 2023, which, given the sort of COVID and related delays in the system, is most people, then they're going to have to, the capital is going to have to remain invested in at risk anyway. So I think your point is actually maybe it's not a bad thing for most people if Tishman Speyer decide to exercise these options, right?
Correct. It could end up working in your favor. Whereas when we initially started this conversation years back, it was a point of stress maybe that the term might go longer than expected. It might end up being a positive if you are in that scenario where you haven't yet completed your conditional permanent residency. So again, and I apologize because I'm seeing a bunch of questions coming in, but let me just
came in, Pete, was what happens if Tishman doesn't extend? So I think we're talking about redeployment. So
exactly.
Let's move that. First of all, let's answer this first question, which is, for EB5 to be approved, doesn't the project have to be work in progress? Do I hear that the project is due for completion soon before the EB5 applications have been processed? That's not a concern. The issue is that there's two issues here. One is job creation, and in Spiral, I don't think anyone has any concerns with job creation. So that's sort of a dead issue in a positive way. The second is, yes, capital has to remain at risk, and so it's not a question of the project being completed. It's a question of the capital being at risk, the capital be working. So it's a question of when the money comes back from the developer. So perhaps it's good to transition to that discussion, Peter, and you can talk about loan comes back early, or the loan anyway, whether it comes back early or not, it comes back before an investor has filed his or her I-829, before they're ready to complete their immigration process. What is CanAm going to do to help them in that scenario?
So in that event that you haven't completed your sustainment period, you haven't completed that conditional permanent residency, then we would be redeploying your funds. We have been, and I think that we probably had one of the more robust platforms for redeployment over the past 4 years. We put a lot of thought into making sure that we're doing this in a compliant and conservative way to meet your needs. So the redeployment of funds is a continuation of your original investment to make sure that it meets those criteria of the EB5 investment. there's no longer any sort of job creation that needs to be created from this redeployment. It is just a continuation to allow for your funds to remain at risk. So there have been some changes to the options for a redeployment, given the new legislation. So in the previous iteration of the regulations on redeployment, there were some restrictions in that to redeploy with geographic constrictions of the original regional center. Along with that, there was also a little bit more flexibility from some of the options that you could use, in that they allowed for, say, a redeployment into new issue municipal bonds. And we used that because it was specifically used as an example in the original description of redeployment. Those are no longer available. And by the new legislation, equity products are no longer available as well, listed equity products. So what this leaves us with now, and what we think is going to give us a positive array of options, is a redeployment into a portfolio of mezzanine loans of similar scale and scope that allows for you to continue with your investment. We run our redeployments through our registered investment advisory firm, which allows us to comply with immigration and securities laws in terms of the role that we are playing in helping you to determine this, helping to determine the suitability of this redeployment. The redeployment of funds can be done on a nationwide scale. There is now no geographic restriction that holds us back in terms of doing that, which is going to allow for a much wider array of options and to give you a little bit more diversification in this portfolio of mezz loans. And you should be expecting a return on an annual return that's a little bit more commensurate with the capital that's being invested. So you'd be looking at a return of, you say, 3 to 4%, as opposed to the very minimal return that you're receiving now for your current.
What options do you propose to present to invest? I guess, what sort of options do you propose? I guess you're saying it's just a bundled pool of mezzanine loans that they're going to have the
Correct.
option to invest in?
Correct. So what we'd be looking at, and a lot of this is going to be determined by the need or by the time frame that is required for redeployment for a lot of the investors. But if in some of our earliest redeployments, there is very short-term need for redeployment. In our last batch, most all of the redeployments were for, call it, I would say probably almost 10 years or so. But because, let's just say, they were very long-term in their need for redeployment. So a lot of the portfolios that were being structured were for 5 years. We're not going to structure anything for longer than 5 years, because that's a significant period of time. We wouldn't. What we want to also allow for some of those people to continue their investment. But if they continue to need redeployment after that initial 5-year period, we would look for something. But we want to at least allow for some.
Suppose I only need another year, right? And you're offering me an option to invest for 5 years.
Yeah. So again, and I'm assuming, just in a brief look that I had over the the demographics of the people in Spiral who would be looking at redeploying, there's going to be more need for short-term products. So we will likely be offering another short-term investment option. Likely, I would say not less than 2 years, because we don't want to try to be too fine with it and say, like, if it looks like you'll have about a year or a year and a half in terms of your redeployment, we'd want to make sure that we're capturing it all. Because especially for someone who's got
if you have a portfolio of funds, can you not set up some kind of revolving facility, so that, for example, you have some loans within your portfolio that are very short term and others that are very long term, and that may avail individual investors who need to, is kind of to get in line for when a repayment of one of the loans within the portfolio happens. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. What we want to make sure that we're doing is that we are, if we have the ability to offer a shorter term option to people, we want to make sure that we're doing it. But we also want to make sure that the product that they have acknowledged, that they have disclosed that they're moving forward in, is in line with what they're actually getting,
Gotcha.
right? And
So
so,
the other question I have about, then we've got a bunch of investor questions about this is as follows. What I just said a few minutes ago was based upon sort of the law as it was. Now we've got a new EB5 law, and bluntly, if you read it, it seems to me it's actually incredibly poorly drafted, and it's very unclear in some areas and very ambiguous. Taking a extremely, what's the right word, a very extreme view of the way it's drafted, I think there could be a very substantial reduction in terms of the requirement for at-risk period. Now, most likely that won't be USCS's view, but the new law to me, in terms of the required at-risk period and when it begins, I think the new law is incredibly poorly drafted. Does your team have a view on that, Peter? And it's sort of relevant to this discussion.
in terms of how the ambiguity of the
Right. In terms of, because if under the most extreme view, a lot of these discussion about redeployment might be moot because but depending when that clock starts ticking, right? So I'm just wondering if you have a view. We've been talking about the sort of traditional view of EB5 and when it is that's been around forever, but we have this new poorly drafted law. So I'm just wondering if your team, when speaking to other lawyers, you have a view on sort of under the new law, how we're likely to see USCS interpret the requirement for the at-risk period.
Yeah, I mean, trying to guesstimate the interpretation that USCIS, I mean, we're embroiled in other complications of USCIS's current interpretations of the new legislation. I mean, something that we're actually litigating against as we speak. So I wouldn't speak for my legal team, for Walter, in terms of
I understand that.
what they're
I
would say that we certainly we always encourage you to talk to Mark, to talk to your attorney about what his view would be on it. But for us, we kind of have to, from our role, take the most conservative option. In terms of offering, and that's what we're doing. We're giving you options to allow for that.
That's
move
the point
forward.
I'm making, is just so people know, we're sort of having a discussion about the most conservative definition of the at-risk period right now, and sort of the need to redeploy. Let's just go back to some questions. So I guess this is going back to the rent up. I'd covered that twice. I think that you're saying that there's no material deviance in terms of the rent up rate and also in terms of the per square foot. Let me just read a couple of the questions. All commercial office space in New York are struggling due to remote work. Spiral may have leased over 70%, but the price per square foot is soft. Pfizer renegotiated the contract. Is that true?
We didn't receive any notice of Pfizer renegotiating the contract, but I will say that while there are people that are moving away from, there has been obviously some adjustments to people's desire for office space in New York City. But what has fared well in this scenario is brand new high amenity office space, which is what this is, right? So I would say if we were talking about a building that has been in place for 25 years and is concerned about their rental rates, I could see that as a concern. I don't see it as a concern for Spiral, in that this is a brand new building.
Do you have a report on this, Peter, that you can send out that discusses? Because not really.
I mean, I would say this. I mean, if the concern is about their repayment, we're talking about a $212 million loan with a lien on the property, for a fantastically creditworthy organization. The notion of them not repaying our loan for for any of these reasons is highly unlikely. I mean, the impact that could have on their creditworthiness and the amount that their activity in the overall debt market, to put that at risk, for the sake of our partnership's loan is highly unlikely. Now, could that potentially lead them to use those extension years it's possible. You know, if the refinancing rates that they're seeing are not in line with what they would hope, what they would expect, I mean, it could potentially lead to them using some of those extension years. But you know, as we talked about before, that could potentially work in your favor for some of you that would potentially need a short-term redeployment. But in terms of them not, you know, meeting their obligation, I don't see any possibility.
Right, but there's nothing to stop back to you and saying, hey, you know, even beyond those 2 years, we'd like to negotiate a further extension. You'd have to go back to, there's a whole mechanism you'd have to go back if that happened. But there's nothing to stop.
At that 2 years, it's incumbent upon them to pay us. And we could, you know, they could potentially approach us with that, but they also would need to repay us. I mean, again, this is something where when we talk about redeployment options, there is potential that there could be a redeployment option with them. I mean, they are, again, a very creditworthy organization with other financing needs. So if their approach to us was, you know, if we try to structure something for some of these investors who still need to be redeployed while paying the investors who are, you know, again, we'll have the data on who is in who is in a spot where they need to be redeployed. Those investors could be satisfied, and then if there's potentially something for, I mean, we're talking about hypotheticals years down the road, but and it would be something that we would certainly entertain. I mean, this is a group that we've had great success in working with, and I would be interested to see what their future projects are.
Gotcha.
But when their loan matures, it's incumbent upon them to repay us.
Next question. The building is not nearing occupancy to have positive cash flow. How do they expect to refinance under this scenario? Fair to assume they may refinance and use the extension option, please. Opinion, please. I think you kind of talked about this, but I'll ask the question.
And hello, Vamesh. Nice to hear from you. Nice to see you. I feel like we've covered. I mean, like, it is possible that if they're seeing, if it makes more financial sense for them to extend the loan by another year instead of refinancing, it is very much their option, and it's possible that they could do that. But yeah, we will have to wait and see whether or not they decide to use those options.
And because we can't get any data, Peter, from you, we actually can't see the point of sort of where the project might reach positive cash flow, just to follow up on this point, right? Hello?
I'm unclear. So is the concern about whether or not they're going to repay their loan? Because I think we've covered that.
The first part of the question is, no, we talked about like lease up rates and we talked about rental per square foot. But, you know, if you aggregate that all together, this investor is asking about positive cash flow. So I guess he's concerned about sort of the project reaching a point of positive cash flow.
Okay. I mean, we don't necessarily receive that data from Tishman in terms of their cash flow on the building. But again, all that we have, all our reports are that they are completing all their obligations, and the loan is very much in good standing, and they are on track to be repaying us, whether it's at the end of that loan term or whether it's at the end of the extension years. We have no reason to believe that they won't be meeting their obligation.
Vamesh, did you have a question? You were raising your hand. I don't know how this questions and hands works. Sorry.
No, I just said hi because Peter said hi.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Vamesh. Right.
Nice
Next question. We filed an I-829 this January. Is it possible for us to get our money back sooner? We started our EB5 journey in 2018. Do we have to wait a minimum of 5 years?
Yes. I mean, it is the reality of an EB5 investment, is that you are committing to the loan term. When your I-526 is approved, you are now committed for the term of the loan. And so that is the reality of the situation.
So the earliest possible repayment, just to go over it again, you explained, is September 2023, or reminded everyone, correct? And then we could face 2 one-year extensions, that's just under the sort of renegotiated terms. As long as they remain as they are, it'll be September 2023 and 2 potential one-year extensions.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what. Just to be clear, that there isn't a renegotiation. I mean, those are their options, so they can use them. And at which point after that, they have to repay us. You know, if
Gotcha.
there is potentially a redeployment option that we could discuss with them, we might. But not a renegotiation with, it is then incumbent upon them to repay the partnership.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. That's the one we just answered. Sorry. How many Spiral investors have gotten an I-526 approval until today? Do you happen to have that number?
241.
241. Out of how many are in? What's the total number in the project, Peter?
Out of 431.
431. Okay. And do you happen to have to hand, right, the sort of most recent priority date, if you understand what I'm saying, for an I-526?
No,
If not,
I understand. Yeah, I don't have it off the top of my head, but yeah, I wouldn't know. But
does the CanAm have that information? If not, don't worry. Obviously, you're not going to release somebody's name, and I wouldn't have it because there's other law firms involved. But if you happen to have that, clients ask for that sometimes, so it might be an interesting data point.
hold on a sec. Let me see if I. Okay. So from what I could see, I don't have all of it in front of me, but some of the most recent dates I've been seeing are like November of 2018.
Okay, so okay, fair enough. I thought we had one in 19, but perhaps not. Okay, I don't see any other questions. So I will recap some things in a minute. But Peter, is there anything else you want to add that we haven't really talked about that you'd like people to know about the project?
The project is going fantastically well. I mean, the unfortunate reality is that, as you guys have all seen, there's been some bottlenecks caused by both the situation with the pandemic, as well as the unfortunate lapse of the program that has set a number of you back. And it really is a shame that has something that's going to be affecting your journey. Unfortunately, these are things that are out of Mark's control. We are kind of stuck in the situation that has been presented to us, and all we can try to do is again present the best options for you going forward. But I mean, this is a great project. It was great when you came in. It's going fantastically well. Tishman is a great borrower. As I mentioned, they had 2 previous loans with us that they've repaid full on time. And the project continues to be meeting its project goals. So obviously we're happy to answer any questions as things come up. Send them to me, send them to my IR team. I would very much recommend that if you have a consular interview coming up, or when your consular interview does come up, to reach out to our IR team to get that packet of information, because that'll be very helpful for you when you go in.
Somebody just texted me a question, which is, so this question says, so Tishman, right, is the direct borrower. I think what the person probably means is there isn't some sort of SPV or other special purpose entity or bankruptcy remote entity that Tishman set up as the borrower. Do you follow what I'm saying?
I follow what you're saying. There is, I think that the borrower is something West 34th. There is a partnership that I'm going to misuse the term, I guess, probably the legal entity, but it's not Rob Tishman or Tishman's Fire. They do have another entity that is the borrower, but we also do still have the collateral that is in place on it that again, leaves us very little concern.
Gotcha. So just, I guess, because the person asked the question, there's no corporate guarantee from Tishman corporate entity to this entity that's the borrower.
No, there's no corporate entity. Yeah.
All right. Well, Peter, that I think you helped and sort of add a lot of sort of clarity to a lot of points here. Is there anybody on this who has any additional question or thoughts? Oh, hold on. Looks like there might be. No, it says there are 5 questions. Open 5. Yes, there's more questions, Peter.
Right.
So do you have another moment for some more questions?
Of course.
Let's scroll down. There's lots of questions. Hi, is the developer going to finish the loan and pay back in 5 years? I think we talked about that, but as that question was only just asked, perhaps you can answer it again.
Yeah, so the Tishman is very much, the loan is very much in good standing. It is on pace to be, well,
to be clear, it's not quite Tishman.
The loan matured in September of 2023. And we have no reason to think that they won't be on pace to repay at that point. They do have the option for 2 individual 1-year extensions. So, I think we've talked about this, a few times, but they do have the ability to use those extensions if they so choose. And it's going to come down to the rates that they're seeing for refinancing the loan.
So if the funds are redeployed, will the EB5 application have to be modified? I think that's probably talking about the individual investor, and the answer is no. But do you have anything to add to that, Peter?
No, I think that is very accurate.
All right.
Okay. There are certain things I very much, we would always talk about, making sure you talk about to that with your.
Okay, here's a really good question. I'm not sure it's relevant to existing investors because of the grandfathering language. So, not something to worry about, but it is a good question. So has CanAm been reauthorized as a regional center, or is it still in limbo because of the new EB5 legislation? Now, before Peter answers that, I would just point to the grandfathering language that protects existing investors. So, I don't want anyone to lose sleep over what Peter's about to say. But with that said, Peter, perhaps you can address that question.
So Mark very much alluded to what the answer is that this is an unfortunate and unexpected interpretation of the new legislation by USCIS. I kind of alluded to it before. So we have filed for the redesignation of this regional center with USCIS. It will take whatever time it takes for them to potentially move forward with it. But there is also litigation from another entity that is pushing back on this issue, and we have litigation that is pending as well to push back on this issue. All that being said, it's irrelevant for you because the legislation and USCIS has made very clear that your petition is moving forward without any concerns because it is being grandfathered, even though the regional center that sponsored it, as counterintuitive as that might be, still needs to be redesignated. So it's an unusual and unfortunate circumstance that we're kind of dealing with in the industry, but not something that is of concern to you. You have no concern with your petition moving forward.
So I think, a couple of things for me come out of this conversation. One is if you have your consular interview coming up, our firm have a office in Mumbai that's more or less directly opposite BKC, and where investors have an interview, we have, where requested, arranged for live interview prep training right near the consulate in Mumbai, there in BKC. So that's available. But a key and important part of that is knowing something about the project. They will ask you something about the project. Do they expect you to know every detail? Absolutely not. but they expect you to have a reasonable level of knowledge about the project, which is, why we're talking about a lot of these types of issues, so you have a general familiarity with what's going on. So Pete also said that, their investor relations team have an updated sheet of likely questions on this. So, please do reach out to them. Our firm will, and, we can provide you a copy of that too. But one of the great things of having invested with CanAm is, sort of, in my mind, one of the most reliable regional centers in the industry is this. No reason, you don't need Countbook to the other regional centers in the industry. I'd be very careful about talking to them without a lawyer, but I wouldn't have that concern with CanAm and with getting this information. So please do talk to them about that interview prep sheet, or we can obtain it for you as part of an interview preparation process. Oh, we got more questions, Peter. I'm sorry. I have got my green card via another source and not preferring EB5. I'm aiming to withdraw my funding after 5 years. Please advise if so. Okay. So I think we've talked about that. Someone else who might want their funds back earlier, and I think the answer you've given is they're committed under the terms of the agreement they executed for you, which is at a minimum till September 2023, and then with the possibility of 2 one-year extensions after that. Is that the answer you gave?
Yep, absolutely. Obviously, we're ecstatic for you that you were able to achieve your green card. That is one of the goals of going forward with this. But in having multiple routes that you're pursuing for it, it doesn't necessarily change the obligation to the partnership and to this investment. So obviously, it's great, and you're not necessarily going to need to receive the immigration benefit that comes from this investment, but your funds are still committed for the long term.
There's a question, is that relevant for adjustment of status applicants too? I'm not sure what that refers to, but if we were talking about the investment timeline, there's no difference whether you're a consular processing person or an adjustment of status person in terms of you signed an agreement with CanAm. Well, it wasn't when you signed into the partnership, and you would be bound by that, which is the term that we've just talked about, which is the September 23 plus 2 one-year extensions. If that's not what that's meant by that question, please ask a follow-up question. Oh, there is a follow-up question. Interview preparation. Okay. No. So adjustment of status, it's a different process to consular processing. Please give us a call about adjustment of status, and we can talk about it. Of course, the great benefit, if you like, the blue flashing light special of the new law is concurrent filing, which means that even if you don't have your I-526 approved, you may have the ability to file an I-485 and get an employment authorization and a travel permit. There are complications depending on your visa status in the United States that need to be discussed with you, but you have the ability to concurrently file if you have a pending I-526, and that would entail obtaining a employment authorization card and an IP, a travel permit, which to me is the blue flashing light special of EB5. Now, partly why I say it's the blue flashing light special is because special offers expire. And the thing that may cause this special offer to expire is if India, I think everybody on this is Indian, maybe with 1 or 2 exceptions, if India were to go into backlog stroke retrogression, the ability to concurrently file will disappear. So that's why I view it as a special offer. It's available right now at no extra cost. So that's concurrent filing. Then, Peter, over this call, we talked about there's more questions. No, wrong. We talked about the performance of the project. I think I'll say this for the last time. What you told us is that the lease-up rate and the per square foot charge, there's no material deviance to the initial plan, which to me was really refreshing to hear someone make that commitment. That said, we just talked about in response to an investor's question that borrower, you know, we're talking about Tishman Speyer, but we need to remember the borrower is not quite Tishman Speyer. It's a separate entity. So, you know, I guess we'll see, but it sounds like everything's, from what you're telling us, that things are on track. Is that a fair synopsis of what we talked about in this call, Peter?
Yep.
Right. Are there any other questions? If I've missed your question, please raise your hand very quickly. Otherwise, speak now, forever hold your peace. And again, you know, I just want to reiterate, I do think, you know, I shouldn't really say this, but as a lawyer, I do think you made a CanAm, work of regional centers. And, you know, bluntly, I receive investors coming to us in distress with other regional centers. And the way that some other regional centers treat their investors is reprehensible. And I've never seen CanAm behave in that manner. Now, is everything always 100% perfect and as investors would like it to be? No. And sometimes that's not anyone's fault that we've had COVID or we've had a new law. But, you know, on behalf of our investors, Peter, I'd like to say, you know, thank you for taking care of everybody. There are a few questions here that, you know, perhaps we do need to follow up on. But overall, you know, thank you for taking care of our investors.
My pleasure. It's great to hear from you all. I'm glad. I mean, obviously, it was a pleasure having you all invest in the project. It's a pleasure to continue working with you. So, you know, we're happy to help anytime anything comes up for you. And please feel free to reach out to me, reach out to Mark. You know, I gave over that our IR team. They're happy to answer questions and to provide information packet. But yeah, it's great to talk to you, and I look forward to hearing from you all soon.
I don't quite understand. There's a question just asked. Is it possible by any way, can the principal applicant or the investor transfer I-526 application and investment into 19-year derivatives without losing the filing date? I'm not quite sure what that question means. Does that make any sense to you, Peter?
In terms of making your 19-year-old derivative the primary applicant on the petition?
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
It means that. No, you can't transfer the principal applicant after the case is filed, if that's the question.
Right.
So Vimesh, you know, his closing comment, Peter, and lesson for you and me is, please do communicate like this more regularly. So maybe we should have a little chat, like every quarter or every half year or something like that, on the larger projects.
I mean, you know, and hopefully you're all receiving the project updates that we're sending out, you know, electronically. So I think that, you know, if we wanted to use that as a starting point, if when you receive those, if there's any further follow-up that people have, that would be, you know, that could make a lot of sense to have discussion after that. But yeah, always happy
you
to
can
communicate.
see, you can see the comment is half year is better. So there you go. So maybe we can meet again in 6 months' time, if that would be good.
Sounds lovely.
All right, guys. Thank you very, very much to everybody. It's late here in India for everybody. It's 8 o'clock. And, you know, if you have any questions, we're here. Pete's here. And we'd love to hear from you all. All right. Take care. Have a good night. Bye.
All right, guys. Thank you.